My judges ready? Timer? And the affirmative team. Roman. Right. The affirmative team didn't present you with a criterion in their last speech. They didn't outline how they believe the judges should view the debate round. So we as the negative team would like to produce the criterion of stock issues. We as the negative team believe that it's the burden of the affirmative team in today's debate round to uphold all four of the stock issues. That is significance, whether they do substantial reform; solvency, whether they solve for the harms; topicality, whether they conform to the resolution; and inherency, whether or not their plan has already been done in the status quo. What I'm doing in this speech is look specifically at the issue of topicality, whether or not the affirmative plan is in fact a revenue generation policy, whether or not it upholds the resolution. And if at the end of this speech, in the end of the debate round, we've proven that the affirmative plan goes outside the resolution, they should be voted down for two reasons. First of all, they don't uphold the criterion of stock issues. Secondly, it's not within our jurisdiction to vote for them, given they're not under the resolution. So I'm going to have several topicality arguments in this speech. We're first going to be looking at a general topicality against the affirmative team's case. My first topicality argument is tax policy. Tax policy. Now, we as a negative team look at the term revenue generation policy, and we define this as the way by which the government generates revenue. Now, we believe that this specifically is talking about tax policy, when the government puts in place taxes or tariffs in order to generate revenue. Now, the affirmative team's plan is not actually a tax policy. It's talking about taking royalties. And the affirmative team's plan, first of all, several of their mandates just aren't topical at all. We'll get to that in a moment. But the affirmative team's plan isn't actually a tax policy. Now, there's 5 reasons, we're going to call these standards in the debate round, why you should agree with the negative team on this issue of topicality, why tax policy is much better than what the affirmative team would like to believe. The affirmative team would like to believe that anything that affects government revenue is topical. So there's 5 standards. Standard number A is limits. Limits. Now, we as the negative team believe that there needs to be some way to limit the resolution in today's debate round, and we believe that the resolution puts certain limits on the affirmative team's case. When it comes to this year, it's tax policy. When we're talking about revenue generation policy, we have to look at what the actual term revenue generation policy means, not just take the word revenue and the word generation and say that those combined mean anything that government generates revenue for. So we need to set these limits on the affirmative team, or else the amount of cases under the resolution would explode. So standard number B is bright line. Bright line. We at the negative team are very clear on what is topical and what is not topical. If it's a tax policy, it's a policy that our government taxes individuals or businesses or companies. If it's a tax policy, then it is topical. The affirmative team hasn't showed us clearly what is topical and what is not topical. The third standard is predictability. Predictability. Now, the negative team in today's debate round entered the round prepared to talk about tax policy, whether that's individual income or corporate income or tariffs. That's what the negative team was prepared for. The affirmative team, by going outside of the resolution, has chosen a case the negative team couldn't predict. Has chosen a case the negative team hasn't been studying on this year, because this year's resolution is about revenue generation policy, is about tax policy, not about hard rock mining. The standard number D is framers' intent. Framers' intent. Now, interesting enough, we did have an environmental policy resolution a couple years ago. That was my first year as a debater. When the framers made this resolution, they were thinking about tax policy, because the affirmative team is trying to take a case that was 2 years ago, environmental policy, given they're talking about hard rock mining and pollution. That's environmental policy. That's not dealing with tax policy. And it's not, when the framers wrote the resolution, they knew that we had environmental year, so they decided revenue generation policy, and we as a negative team interpret that as tax policy. Findings that are real world. Real world. When the real world talks about hard rock mining and about royalty, they're not talking about revenue for the government. They're talking about pollution. They're talking about the environment. So in today's debate round, we as the negative team don't believe that we should vote for a plan that in the real world doesn't even fit this resolution. Now, there's 2 impacts. Impact 1 is education. Education. Given the affirmative team has gone outside of the resolution, and given these 5 standards, the affirmative team is harming the educational value of debate, given they're not sticking to the resolution that was put in place for them, and given they're making the resolution far too broad and going back to previous years. The second impact is jurisdiction. Jurisdiction. If at the end of the round we can prove the affirmative plan falls outside the resolution, we as the debate teams and you as the judges don't have the jurisdiction to vote for it, given it falls outside of the resolution. And the third impact is that a criterion not upheld. If the affirmative team doesn't uphold all 4 of the stock issues, one of them being topicality, they don't uphold the criterion of stock issues. Now, my second topicality argument is significance. Significance. Now, the affirmative team read a piece of evidence in their 1AC that they generate about $1 billion of revenue per year. We as the negative team, first of all, we're going to contest that. But second of all, we as the negative team believe that the affirmative team has to substantially reform the revenue of the federal government. When the resolution talks about substantially reforming revenue generation policies, it means that the affirmative plan must substantially reform the revenue generation of the federal government. However, the affirmative team, first of all, their piece of evidence said that they get $1 billion of revenue a year. Now, that's not a lot. However, let's take a look at a different piece of evidence from the Wildlife Management Institute in February 2008 about what they would really get. It's only about $300 million over 10 years. quote, a 4% gross income royalty fee on existing mines and an 8% on new mines would raise new revenue estimated by the CBO to exceed $300 million over the next 10 years, unquote. So our evidence is actually post-dating the affirmative evidence. The affirmative evidence was from 2007. This is from 2008. So the Congressional Budget Office says that their plan is only going to get $300 million over the next 10 years. That's clearly not significant, and that's clearly not substantial. And the affirmative team has the burden to have substantial reform of revenue in the debate round. And if they don't do so, then it leads to, again, three impacts of education harm, of jurisdiction, and of the criteria. If the affirmative team goes outside of that, and as a result, their plan shouldn't be passed. Now, a couple of the standards that I ran in the earlier one, I'd like to highlight for this one. The first is that of predictability. We as the negative team entering this debate round, we know the word substantial is in the resolution. We know that that should have an effect on today's debate round. When the affirmative team takes something that affects government revenue by only $30 million each year, that's clearly not a substantial reform. That's clearly not something that the negative team should have to research. And that's my second standard, that of research burden. By opening up the resolution so far with the affirmative team's case, the research burden on the negative team expounds greatly, and the affirmative team could just take one tiny thing that affects government revenue by under $1 billion a year, under $100 million a year, only $30 million a year. That's clearly not significant, and first of all, it doesn't uphold the stock issue of significance, but secondly, given the word substantial is clearly in the resolution, and given the affirmative team clearly doesn't uphold that word in the resolution, they don't uphold the resolution. Now, we're going to specifically address their mandates 1, 3, and 4. None of these have anything to do with government revenue at all. The first is about a government act that has nothing to do with revenue. The third is about a permit process for these miners, and the third is of putting money toward a spending program for the hard rock mining fund. These have nothing to do with revenue generation policy at all. They have nothing to do at all with government revenue. So the affirmative team kind of has two options here. Either one, they can sever all of these mandates from their case, and as a result, they would only have one mandate left of a 2 to 5% royalty, and as a result, they wouldn't claim their advantages, because their advantage too about saving billions of dollars and saving of the American people is about how Americans wouldn't have to clean up. Their mandate 4 is specifically of putting government revenue toward a hard rock mining fund, and given that's severed from their case, they no longer claim that advantage. The second thing that the affirmative team can choose is the affirmative team can choose to lose the debate round. Now, they're obviously not going to choose this. However, we as the negative team believe that if there is an argument to be made that given the affirmative team's 3 mandates here go outside of the resolution, then they don't uphold the resolution. This is because we as the negative team believe that if the affirmative has to go outside the resolution to prove the resolution true, the resolution is automatically proven false. If the affirmative team can't justify the resolution by staying inside the resolution with their full plan, then the resolution is proven false. So let's take a look back at what I talked about in my speech. First of all, we outlined the criterion of stock issues, saying that the affirmative team must uphold the 4 stock issues of team policy debate before your ballot is merited. Then we looked at 3 arguments of topicality. First of all, they don't uphold tax policy. Second of all, they have a very insubstantial reform, and this actually affects 2 of the stock issues. First of topicality, but second because of significance. They only get $30 million of revenue each year. That's hardly anything. The third argument of topicality we looked at was that their mandates 1, 3, and 4 have nothing at all to do with the resolution. So either 1, they are severed from the case and they have no plan advocates and they have no advantages, or 2, the affirmative team loses the round given they have to go outside the resolution to prove it true. So it asks for all these reasons that the negative ballot be given in the debate round given the affirmative team fails to uphold the criterion. Thank you.
Hey, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Ethan. How are you?
I'm doing great. All right, so first off, let's start out with your topicality, because that's all there was, actually.
Yep.
So you said that revenue generation has to be tax policy, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so did you refute our definitions?
Well, you had one definition of revenue and then one definition of generation.
Okay, but you didn't refute them, right?
No, well, we're going to later in the round. If you can bring it up again.
Okay, so you're going to bring up counter definitions?
If you make the revenue definition a big argument in the 2AC, then we're going to refute that.
Okay, all right. So, so did you give a reason to prefer why a tax policy has to be revenue generation, and how come revenue generation can't be?
Those were my 5 standards.
Okay, all right. So, let's talk about your first standard. And you said the limits, and you said that had to be a tax policy.
Yes.
Okay, so and then your B point was bright line, right?
Yes.
Okay, so wouldn't it be something that generates a substantial amount of revenue for the government, as our definitions define revenue generation?
Well,
policy?
first of all, you don't provide a substantial revenue generation for the government.
I'm talking about that.
Okay, but secondly, we as an agency believe that tax policy is better because it's very clear what is topical and what is not. You're just saying that anything
so all right. So when you hear the word revenue generation, do you think of tax policy or do you think of generating revenue?
Revenue generation policy, I think of a substantial policy that the government has in place that is a
That
major
generates
revenue generation
so
source.
would you say
This is taxes.
Okay, so would you say that royalty is a type of tax since it generates revenue for the government?
Well,
just
because
mining
something
tax,
gets the
right?
government revenue doesn't mean it's a tax. I mean, the government borrows money from China. That's not a tax.
Okay, but a royalty specifically, isn't it taxing the companies because they're taking the federal government's resources?
Well, you can make that argument if you want.
Okay, all right. So now your second topicality was that we're not substantial, correct?
Mhm.
And you read a piece of evidence of that. Could I actually see that?
Here you go.
Thanks. All right, now that was talking about 4% on existing and 8% on new ones, correct?
Yes.
Are we doing that?
You said in your plan that you do 2 to 5%.
Correct. So we're not doing. Okay. All right.
No, you're actually less than the evidence
Okay.
says.
All right. So you said in your last point was that mandates 1, 3, and 4 are not topical, correct?
Yes.
So you would agree that mandate 2 is topical?
No. There could be an argument made that mandate 2 is topical because it affects revenue, but mandates 1, 3, and 4 don't affect revenue at all, so
Okay.
they're not topical.
All right. So you said since they're not topical, we can't solve our advantages, correct?
Since they're not topical, 1, you don't have full plan advocates, and secondly, you can't solve specifically for your second advantage.
Okay.
Because your second advantage is all based off the spending program that you.
Okay. So let's just say for one quick second here, even if all of those are extra topical, we would still gain our first advantage, correct?
No, because that one's not topical either. That mandate is
generating new revenue with public resources.
No, because that's not a tax policy.
Generating revenue. Okay, but I thought you just said the.
I had 3 topicality arguments. My last one was specifically looking at your mandates 1, 3, and 4.
Okay, but I thought you said earlier that royalty was a type of a tax since it's.
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay. Oh,
you said that.
Oh, okay. All right. I get it. All right. So would you think? Okay. So would you think royalty is a type of tax?
No.
Oh, okay. So you don't think. All right.